have won the World 2020 final.
The winners, West Indies.
Sri Lanka, the new champions.
Carlos Brathwaite, remember the name.
Live the game, love the game. Live the game, love the game. Live the game, love the game.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Ian Ward. I'm joined by Michael Atherton, Nasser Hussain and Rob Key, and we are going to look ahead to give it its correct title, the ICC Men's T20 World Cup. Now, myself and Rob are still here in the UK, but Michael and Nasser are quarantining out in Dubai. I'm going to come to you first, Michael. How is it?
The quarantine is fine, really. We've got 6 days to do in Dubai, and it's fine. You know, you can't really complain. The hotel is okay. The food is quite nice. If you've got a few books and a bit of Netflix, you kind of get through it, really. Obviously, we've been watching a bit of the cricket from the qualifying stage or the round one stage, and then England's warm-up game yesterday. So there's a bit of cricket to keep on top of as well. And you just find ways to pass the time, really. Our producer has taken the nicest room with a balcony and a terrace and just left me and Nas with a smaller cell, but we're getting by.
Well, it's hardly the Shawshank Redemption, though, is it? But dare I ask how you're keeping busy, Nas?
I'm fine, Ian. Actually, I can't notice any difference between this build-up to a tour and any other tour. I'm in my room. I'm having a great time. I don't have to talk to anyone. I don't have to meet anyone. I don't have to do pleasantries with anyone. I just have a chicken Caesar salad for lunch and a chicken biryani, not for the table. That's the only difference. Usually on tour, I'm always thinking of other people and contributing to other people with wine and chicken biryanis for the table. I just have to order for myself. So I'm enjoying isolation. Apart from every morning, we get an update from Atherton on the number of skips he's done. He's trying to break his personal best of 120 skips. That's how he's keeping himself fit. It is a very dull group WhatsApp at the moment.
Well, it's a very dull conversation all round. I mean, it's been nice, Keys, just to be able to wander around and play some golf and get some fresh air, isn't it, over the last week after a long season?
I mean, I feel very jealous listening to that skipping and you ordering chicken biryani. You made out like you're making it for people. But you basically, when you go for a curry, you order an extra biryani. Well done. I mean, self.
Right, enough of this drivel. Let's look at the competition. So we're in the qualifying stage at the moment. So there's two groups, A and B. Ireland, Namibia, Netherlands, Sri Lanka in A. Bangladesh, Oman, PNG and Scotland are in B. And the top two of those groups will go into the Super 12s to join the likes of England, Australia, South Africa and, of course, India. Michael, from the cricket you've seen so far, we've had some games in the qualifiers and some warm-up games. England played India yesterday. What have you made of it? What have you seen? What's caught your eye?
I think just generally on the format, I like the fact that the T20 World Cup, the World Cup, kind of tries to bring in the emerging nations or associate nations. And obviously, it's not straightforward now for the test playing nations. They don't just automatically qualify. You've got to be in the top 8 or whatever. And then those that aren't have got to get through that initial stage. But I think that the T20 format is the obvious format for kind of globalizing the game and extending the game. You know, every country now that plays T20 has a ranking and you know, there's an ability to kind of climb those rankings. And, you know, we've seen in this tournament, Papua New Guinea, for example, making their World Cup bow. I had a chat with their captain and coach a few days ago, and, you know, they couldn't be more thrilled to be there. And it's been a great journey for them. So I think that carrot of playing in a World Cup is fantastic for the emerging nations. And of course, T20, the length of the game, it means that you can play 2 games in a day. So it doesn't kind of extend the tournament and elongate it. Sometimes in the past, we've seen with 50 over World Cups that they've just gone on forever. And you kind of lose a bit of the thread and a bit of the dynamism of the tournament. So it's a great way, I think, of encouraging emerging nations, but you keep the tournament short still. It's still going to be done and dusted in a month. So it keeps that tension and that narrative build. So broadly on the format, I think it's a fantastic format. And it's great to see sides like Papua New Guinea, Oman. Obviously, we've seen excellent victories for Scotland and Ireland in that opening stage so far.
Nasser, I set Michael's point, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. Some might say, well, we just want to see the best against the best. Is there an argument for that?
Well, we'll see that from Saturday. So I like it like this. I like you have to sit at the top table, you have to put in some good performances and you have to show that you're worthy of sitting at the top table. So, for example, and also in these qualifiers, it's not just some random teams that have been thrown together. They've qualified to be here. And also they're playing against some top nations, as in Scotland beating Bangladesh. You look at Bangladesh, their record, albeit on some turning pitches at home of late, they've turned over a few good sides. So for Scotland to put in that performance and beat them comprehensively, the fielding and bowling performance from Scotland was outstanding. You look at Ireland's performance yesterday. So whoever turns up to the next stage of this T20 World Cup will absolutely deserve to be there. And all the other nations who are already there will be watching the footage this week, because they will be wary of anyone that qualifies through to the Super 12. So I agree that I like this format. You know, I've enjoyed even like the warm-up games, India, England last night. You learn a lot from the warm-up games. I'm already learning that I think dew might be a factor. It's going to be soaking wet out there late in the evening. So captains won't want to be fielding with a wet ball that's like a bar of soap. So I think there's a lot to be gained from weeks like this, especially for the nations that Michael mentioned there.
I think, sorry, before you bring in Rob for the first time, I think the standards have risen as well. I mean, I can remember going way back to the 1996 World Cup when the standard of some of the associate nations or emerging nations was average. We look at Scotland now, they're a top-notch side, and I think it was about 2006 that the ICC kind of gave, I think it was 6% of revenues, of ICC revenues, to on top of what the emerging nations were already getting, which I think was a quarter share or something. And that extra revenue and ability to give these sides more games, more infrastructure, more coaching staff, for example, has paid off. The standard's good now. Scotland look an excellent side to me. Actually, the coach, Shane Berger, used to be the pro at our local club at Radlett, so I know him quite well. He's an excellent bloke. He's a really top-notch lad. Used to play cricket in South Africa, and he's an excellent young coach. So that's good to see.
Well, I was going to ask Rob about that because you commentated on these qualifiers before. Have you definitely seen an improvement in the standard?
Yeah, I think so. The one thing I would say about the associate cricket is that when you did those qualifiers, which was just before sort of COVID happened a couple of years ago, Papua New Guinea are by far and away the biggest success story of that. Because I think nearly every single player comes from pretty much the same town and they're a product of their country and their system. Whereas when you look at some of the other teams, and look, this is Rich coming from England as well, because we do it. Yeah, a lot of these teams, you know, you look at the Netherlands, I mean, they are a lot of South Africans, there's a lot of English players in there, there's guys that have come up from other countries and are now playing for the Netherlands. And the same with Ireland, the same with Scotland. A lot of these places, they're products of another country's system, and they've gone in to then represent the country they were born in or they have a relative in. Whereas Papua New Guinea, they're extraordinary because they have done it pretty much with every player coming from one area, one part of that country, and they managed to qualify. It was and they were the best to watch because when they won a game, I remember in the UAE we were, the celebrations, everything was just extraordinary. It's one of the great sporting stories then.
Sorry, Wardy, I chatted to their captain the other day on Zoom, and do you remember Greg Campbell? Who used to play a bit for Australia, played 4 or 5 tests, I think. He played one at Leeds in that 89 series. And really fantastic to speak to him because Rob's exactly right. It's a kind of homegrown story. You know, it's a long journey that they've come on to get to this World Cup, but they are a side of homegrown players, and there's a little village there that's just outside Port Moresby, the capital, that produces a lot of the players. Not the captain, actually, Asad Varley. He comes from about a little village 3 hours away from Port Moresby, but this one little village just on the outskirts of the capital produces about 8 or 9 of the players. So they have a real close connection and kinship, and I think that's a big advantage to them.
I might be getting this wrong, but didn't your mate Geraint Jones have something to do with PNG back in the day, Keezy?
Yeah, have you seen like Dances with Wolves where Kevin Costner has like an Indian name, which is like Shumani Tutonka something? And And Garrett Jones has a name out there, and it's somehow Mungi Chimbayu. Now, it might be that I might be swearing when I'm saying that, and they might have stuffed me. But that is, yeah, that's his name. And he went out there.
He said it was some of the most enjoyable cricket that he played, didn't he?
You'd be lauding it, wouldn't you, if you're Garrett Jones playing for Papua New Guinea? You must think you like Viv Richards. I mean, seriously.
Well, from Dancing with Wolves back to this competition, and Nass, it's quite. I was looking back, obviously, to the last one. Remember the name? That was 5.5 years ago. The last T20 World Cup. It's quite hard to believe, really. I know pandemics and whatever, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, 5 years ago, Calcutta, that famous evening, that famous commentary line from Ian Bishop. England had all but wrapped it up, and Ben Stokes had to try and nail 4 Yorkers and couldn't. And Carlos Brathwaite smashed it out of the ground, really. And it's, England start the tournament playing against that West Indies side, or some of that West Indies side anyway. So it should be a cracking day Saturday. England have still some areas of concern that they'd like to work on. But, they stand on the possibility and the chance of being World Cup champions in 50 overs and 20 over cricket. And if you go back, to that night in Kolkata, and the change in England's white ball cricket over the last 5, 6, 7 years, driven by Owen Morgan, it has been fantastic. And it is a great, great opportunity for them. But, it's going to be very difficult. There's some good sides out there.
Do you feel that, are you less confident with England now after the last sort of month than you have been at any other stage? Because that's the way I sort of feel with them. I think they've got a few more issues than they have before. Is that fair, Nass?
Yeah, not so much in the last month, Rob. I'd say I'm less confident going into this World Cup than I was going into the 50 over World Cup. Yeah. I think all of us, if you'd asked us, who do you think is going to win that 50 over World Cup? Maybe because it was at home and English conditions. Maybe because of the arrival on the scene of Jofra Archer. That was an incredible boost to that England side. They were already still a crack outfit. And then suddenly you add Jofra Archer into the mix. That's adding even more. And they were the complete outfit. And we all felt that unless something went drastically wrong, that they were the side to beat. I'm not so sure I'm as confident with the 2020 side. I would say still that India are the side to beat, and England have one or two areas of concern that they would like. I mean, the skipper's form is one of them, Owen, and there are others. But you would still look, when sometimes we analyse our side to death. If you ask some of the other nations, who do you think have got a really good chance in this World Cup? They will all be wary of England. They know what this England side can do. So I would be surprised if England weren't in that final. I would be going at this stage for an India-England final, but there are areas to work on.
There's a few things there, aren't there? I mean, T20, the shorter the game, the more unpredictable it is, really, in 50 over cricket. If you think of the history of the 50 over World Cups, it's rarely produced a champion that's not been a worthy champion. More often than not, the best side wins out. I suppose in T20, the shorter the game, the more chances of an upset you've got. And then England, they have got some issues. No Archer, that's a massive blow because he bowls across all phases. The form of some of those players who are in the second half of the IPL wasn't great. Morgan, Livingston's got a bit of an injury from last night. Wait and see how clear that is. And the death bowling, looks a bit iffy. Will they play Tamal Mills or not? The one thing I think Nass just mentioned it briefly at the start, actually, was the amount of dew yesterday in that game. In the games in Oman, or the kind of warm-up the stage one games that we've seen, the new ball has swung quite a bit. Even Paul Sterling was getting his little off spinners to float yesterday. But in the England-India game, there's a lot of dew. Now, England have only picked kind of one specialist spinner, haven't they, in Adil Rashid, and everybody thought that was a strange thing to do. India have basically gone with 4 specialist spinners, but when you saw the amount of dew, that might not be such a disadvantage for England.
Going to go back, Keezy, to Owen Morgan as a captain, as a batsman. Now, coming into this World Cup, no form, as the guys were saying, in IPL. He didn't play in the warm-up game the other day. That might be just giving him a break. But if you look down at the top order there that they played against India, albeit they lost, Roy, Butler, Malan, maybe come back to him in a sec, Bairstow, who's in good form. Livingston is the new X factor, particularly in the absence of Ben Stokes. And then you got Moeen Ali, who smashed 43 off 20. Would Morgan be strong enough to leave himself out if he didn't think his form was up to it? Would he be strong enough to say, do you know what? What's best for the team is someone else plays? If he does want to play, how do you get him into that top order that I've just read out? Who are you leaving out?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways they can go with that. I think Owen Morgan would leave himself out, and the key there is if he felt that was the right thing to do. I just don't think that he will. I think, you look at it in the IPL, you could arguably have left himself out of the IPL teams for KKR, who got through to the final, but he didn't. And I tend to think on this World Cup, in conditions out there in the UAE, captaincy is going to be a big thing. So I would be happy to let Owen Morgan play. Now, then they have decisions on the makeup of their team. You said we'll talk about Milan later. Now, you could leave out Milan, and that then gives you your lineup. How would you go? You could have Moeen Ali could go up there, who gets used for Chennai in a different sort of way to what England have. But you can still get Morgan in with Milan, if you like. You could still go, if I think now you've got Butler, Roy, Milan, Bairstow, Livingston, then Morgan comes in at 6. Which pretty much just makes him a captain almost. And you're going to use him every now and again with the back coming in, which he doesn't necessarily do anything with anyway. But I personally would have Morgan in there because I think the captaincy is actually a big factor in this.
Who would you leave out then?
Well, you see, I would leave out Milan personally.
But he's the number one ranked batsman in the format.
Yeah, but whose form? But probably not over the last however many games England have played, and in conditions out there where these pitches are going to be slow and they're not going to come on. Yes, the dew might come down, stuff like that. The power play is going to be absolutely vital. You cannot, in this competition, I don't think, in this country, be slow, and you can't afford to have someone who's going to catch up, which is what Milan will do a lot of the time. I mean, you look in the IPL, this leg of the IPL that they've just had, which is the only thing we've really got to go on in the UAE of late. The power plays were the most successful, or the power play in that leg was the most in the history of the IPL, the highest scoring. And that tells you how important it was because it was so hard to catch up. So I would be very wary of having Milan in there eating up balls on occasion. And leaving too much for the hitters down the end to do.
Well, where do you sit with this, Nass, and also the importance of a captain in T20?
Well, let's start with that. I completely agree with Rob that Owen Morgan plays, he captains. If he's not getting any runs, he plays, he captains. And you have to look at the IPL final and see the importance of captaincy in T20 cricket. The IPL final, MS Dhoni, Owen Morgan. 2 of the greatest white ball captains there have ever been. Owen Morgan dragged his side up pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, before they had to come back for this leg. Kolkata were a shambles. Morgan dragged them up into a final. Last year, Chennai were an absolute shambles. They didn't change much. They didn't change personnel. MS Dhoni dragged them into yet another final, and yet again they win it. It can't be coincidence that Dhoni and Morgan are always there in white ball cricket. So Morgan plays. If he's not getting any runs, Morgan plays. As far as the power play goes, I agree again with Rob. I hate agreeing with Rob, but he's spot on. I saw a stat in the paper this morning. In the IPL, the recent edition, 23 out of the 30 wins came from sides that had got more runs in that power play. It is absolutely vital you use that set of overs to get ahead before pace comes on, before the pitches die. That one area I would disagree is I think that David Milan has earned the right to be given first dibs at the role. When you're number one and your stats tell you how good you've been, I think you've earned that right to be the first person to start off. And if you don't do it and you don't use the power play, then you've got other options of, I think, Moeen Ali. I think Moeen Ali's undervalued and underused in white ball cricket by England, and Chennai use him and other franchises use him better. The only thing I'll say about all that is we know how ruthless Morgan can be. You only have to ask David Willey that before the last World Cup. Thanks for everything you've done. I'm leaving you out. And you have to ask Alex Hales that. Thank you very much, but the trust of the team, etc. He is ruthless. And that will be the test of Owen Morgan. I know as a captain, it's very, very easy to be ruthless when you yourself are contributing and doing really well. When you're not contributing, and some people might be thinking, well, are you worth your place in the side? Can he be just as ruthless and turn to the number one batsman, ranked batsman in T20 cricket and say, we're looking in a different direction? Your gut feel with Morgan is that he can be and he will be. I mean, look at this week. You're out of nick. You haven't got any runs. You averaged 10 in the IPL. You got 2 warm-up games. How many of us on this podcast would have said that Owen Morgan would have played in that first game? None of us. Morgan did a Morgan. I'm not playing in that warm-up game. I'll have a little break. And he could well just turn up to that Saturday and the tournament and just smash it. He is a unique, streaky player, and no one really should second guess him.
You'd have to leave out a bowler then. So you're going with your 5 bowlers and Livingston as your 6th under your.
Yeah, it's not easy, Rob. I mean, the thing is with, I think, Mo got smashed around the other day and spin and 2 spinners. I was speaking to Nighty on WhatsApp earlier today. He did the whole IPL and he felt with the dew and spin, sometimes the spin isn't going to be as much of a role as we all think. It's obviously going to be a role. Look where we're playing and these pitches will be tired. But actually sometimes, and this is the area that England might lack, is that sometimes what he saw in the IPL was that the medium dobbers like Bravo or someone with subtle variations of slower balls and knuckle balls and balls out the back of the hand actually were the ones, and that your average finger spinner got belted a bit. So it'll be fascinating to see what England pick on that Saturday, that first game.
What would you do, Michael, in terms of balancing the side and also potentially, and you touched on it earlier, the use of Tymal Mills, who at the end, you talk about death bowling along with CJ in the 100, has been very, very good. And if cutters and pace off is working, from a great load of pace on the ball, 90 odd mile an hour, to then taking a lot of pace off, as Nasser's referring to, could actually be a real bonus for England.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way Morgan's going to leave himself out on form. No way. I mean, we don't know what his form will be at the start of the tournament, but if he didn't leave himself out of the KKR side on his form there, he ain't going to leave himself out of the England side. I think he only made double figures once in about 9 knocks for KKR once the IPL restarted. So there's no way he's going to leave himself out. Tymal Mills has excellent numbers at the death, doesn't he? And what you know about Morgan is that he's quite keen to stay with players that have been in the system or in the side. And Mills was quite a late addition to the squad, wasn't he? He came in, he's hardly played in the 2 or 3 year build-up and has come in quite late.
As was Archer, though, in fairness, for the 50-over World Cup. He wasn't afraid to get him in.
Yeah, I mean, Archer came in late because he couldn't have come in before.
Sure.
But Mills kind of has been available and hasn't played. But his numbers are excellent. I think he's a real chance to come into the team at the death. And I'm assuming he'll play the second warm-up game before the first game against the West Indies. They'll obviously want to manage him as well because of his body and obviously his history of injuries. So they want to manage his workload, although it seemed in the blast at the back end there that he was able to get through more overs than perhaps he had done previously. But I think his numbers suggest he's a real chance to play.
Talking about numbers, Morgs likes his numbers and he likes the stats and he likes looking at what's working and patterns and whatever. How important will that be for England in this World T20 and indeed the whole World Cup?
Well, it's the way Morgan goes. It's very interesting. Nasser made the point about the 2 IPL final captains, Dhoni and Morgan. I mean, they couldn't be more different. If you listen to Dhoni and Stephen Fleming at the end of that final, they basically poured a bucket of cold water over data and analytics and said, we like to go on feel and instinct and experience. And that works for us. And you can't argue 4 IPL finals. But nor can you argue with Morgan's record as a one-day captain. And he likes to go the data and analytics way. He's leaned heavily on Nathan Lehman, who is England's senior one-day stats man or analytics man. And of course, Morgan took Nathan to KKR to work with him there. And Nathan's been seen in T20 internationals, passing signals from the boundary edge Morgan. So that's the way he likes to do it. He likes to dive deep into the numbers in his prep for the game. He's a very kind of cool, calm, rational, analytical captain. Other people do it differently. So I don't think there's one way fits all. It's whatever kind of works for you. But there's no doubt that this form of the game is more data-driven, analytics-driven than perhaps other formats of the game. So for England, at least, they like it, they go with it, and it's gonna be a big factor for them.
Right, we'll look at the bigger picture in a minute. But Keezy, what are England's big strengths then? We've touched on what problems they might have in balancing the side. There's no Archer, that might be counterbalanced by two Malmill. But what are their great strengths, would you say, as a side?
Well, it's their batting, isn't it? Especially up the top, the way they can attack that power play. If Butler comes off, they'll beat any team in the world. And the same with Jason Roy, who's very much the man who is there just to get off to an absolute flyer. Butler might have a look for a couple of overs, but Roy's the one. They just want him to get 20 off 10 balls minimum. Go out there, and they're happy, actually. If he doesn't average great, but his strike rate's good, Morgan is happy with that. You've then got, obviously, Milan, if he does play, who's got a very good record. You've then got, as well, Johnny Bairstow, who's one of the best openers in T20 cricket in the world, but he'll end up coming in at 4. And then you've got, and this has always been the crux for me, with Butler, whether he opens or not. It's never been about whether Butler should open. It's, do they have someone who can put the fear in the opposition in the middle order? And with Livingston, they have that now. So if he continues that form that we saw this summer for England and in domestic competitions, I mean, he is as exciting as they come. And that has been, in England's batting conundrum, that's been that sort of missing piece that they've needed. Well,
they've had one game, and it's broadened out a bit. India, obviously, in the other group. But as we saw last night, there's plenty of talent, and we know there's plenty of talent in that India side. I mean, are they just clear favourites, India, Nasser, in your opinion, with the wealth of talent and the experience of T20 in these conditions?
They are favourites. I wouldn't say clear favourites simply because of the format. The shorter the game, things can happen. You only have to look at the last final. England were 4 balls away from winning it. And T20, the shorter the game, an individual brilliance of 70 or 80 or 3 deliveries suddenly change it the other way round. So anyone could upset India in any knockout game. And their record actually of late in ICC tournaments is not good. And that's something that they're going to have to, with the weight of the Indian audience and the fans weighing heavily on their shoulders of when I think they'll get to a knockout game, and then all of a sudden you cannot afford a mistake. That's going to be the thing for them. When they get to a stage, you look at the last World Cup against New Zealand, and suddenly it's a low scoring game and they don't have a plan B, and they get rolled over by New Zealand, a very good New Zealand side. So that's going to be the issue for them, is a knockout game and the expectancy on everyone thinking that they will win this. And the reason people think is, you look on paper, that lineup has everything. It has some of the greatest white ball batsmen. Rohit Sharma didn't play yesterday, but Ishan Kishan, KL Rahul, his form in T20 cricket is just phenomenal. And then you've got one of the greatest white ball batters there's ever been in Virat Kohli. You've got depth in their batting. After that, then you've got the fast bowlers that come in, and obviously the mystery spin all the way through. They're well led by Kohli. They've got the mentor on the sidelines of MS Dhoni. So you'd think they would be absolute favourites, but you just never know in this format. And that's what they've got to get their heads around, a knockout game, and suddenly they need a plan B. They need something different. They suddenly 30 for 3. And the other problem with India sometimes is that they're so good at the top, Rohit and Virat and KL Rahul, and they boss games and boss games and boss games, and the middle order haven't had much of a hit, and you suddenly get to a knockout or a final and they are 30 for 3 because the standard has just gone up and the middle order haven't had a hit, and then you go, okay, now you need to do it. So they're the areas that India will have to focus in on, but on paper they've pretty much got every base covered.
Well, they're in Group 2. So Group 2 is Afghanistan, India, Pakistan and New Zealand. And we'll talk plenty about India, I'm sure, throughout the tournament. But let's deal with what's happening in England's group, which is Group 1. They'll obviously have a couple of qualifiers in there at some point. Australia, South Africa and Michael, first up, it's West Indies. And I was looking down West Indies' squad. It's quite an aging squad. I mean, there's no Sunil Narine, which for me was slightly surprising. But Russell, Gale, Bravo, Pollard, even Ravi Rampal's back in there. What sort of setup have they got, and what are their chances to retain that crown?
They've got some aging champions, as you rightly say. These guys are some of the greatest T20 players that we've seen. Gale and Pollard and Bravo and the like, no Narine, as you say. But they've been great performers in this format for many years. West Indies have won this tournament twice, 2 out of the last 3 times that it's been played. So it's almost like one last hurrah for this champion team. And I think there's still a very strong chance for the simple reason that basically, if you boil T20 down, it comes down to who hits more boundaries and who hits more sixes. And West Indies are not going to be short of firepower. So if you just kind of go from that very simple baseline, they've got a lot to offer. I think England and West Indies will go through in Group 1, and I think India and Pakistan will go through in Group 2, and after that, it's a toss-up.
Okay. Well,
what do we think, lads, about the Narine situation? I think he's not in the squad because he failed a fitness test. Have I got that right? Ath, you're usually the man to go to on these things, but I think he didn't pass the levels of fitness that suddenly Rob Key appears on my screen for some unknown reason, but he didn't pass the levels of fitness required. You only have to bowl 4 overs. He's the best white ball T20 bowler there has ever been. What do you need to pass that, or can you have one rule for one and one for the others? What would the team say if suddenly he turned around and said, you know what, Sunil didn't need to pass that. He's an absolute superstar bowler. He plays anyway.
I mean, this might be a massive assumption, but are you telling me that Chris Gale passed a fitness test? That, some of these players that smash it out the park, Kieran Pollard himself, that's the problem when you start putting restrictions on people for fitness. Which fitness test is it? Can he not do the bleep test? We had Michael Carberry at Kent who couldn't get past level 9 on the bleep test, but he was, the best athlete of all of us, really, by an absolute mile. I personally think that his type of spin and the way that he can bowl, I mean, like you always say, what's the opposition batting lineup? Are they happy or unhappy that Narayan's not there? They're probably dancing in the street. Sam Billings spoke about him in the 100 and said, he's a keeper. He is so hard to pick. So I think everyone else is made up. When you look down at the West Indian spin since then, it's nowhere near as experienced or as good as Narayan.
You could actually broaden that out, couldn't you, about some of the players that are not here and not playing. If you look at South Africa, for example, no AB, no Faf, no Imran Tahir. Think of the team that they could put out. No Chris Morris. Think of the team that they could put out if all those guys were available. So, it's not just Narayan, although he could be a key link there for West Indies, but there are 1 or 2 other greats missing as well.
I remember, and you would have done this with me, with Kieran Pollard. He would have been in the studio with us in one of the World Cups. We're talking 7 or 8 years ago. And I remember thinking, when you get these sort of guys who are swipers, who just used to come in like he does, and they smack it, they bowl a few phantoms, and you just sort of think, they're not going to think much about the game. They just go out there and they crash, bang, wallop. I was so impressed with him. I remember thinking then when we did, not the way that he was a pundit, although he was very good, but I remember the way he spoke off camera, thinking this bloke would make a great captain of the West Indies, and think if I was in charge of the West Indies cricket board, God forbid, I would have given him the captain.
I hear you were high on their list, Rob.
But I would have given him the captaincy 7 or 8 years ago and said, go on then, you're in charge. You are the man. I thought he was such an impressive individual. And when we talk about Morgan and Kane Williamson and all these people, he's another one I think is going to be a great captain.
Well, first up for England's West Indies, that's Saturday. Then on the 27th, they play the qualifier from Group B. It'd be B2. So you're sort of thinking that's either Bangladesh or Scotland, but we'll leave that for a minute. Then on the 30th, it's Australia. Nasser, where are Australia at with their T20 cricket, would you say? I mean, you got your likes of Steve Smith. Finch appears to be fit now. The bowling can be powerful. Cummins, Hazelwood, bit of spin with, say, someone like Swepson. How do you see their chances?
It's funny actually, because when I interviewed, we were in South Africa just before COVID struck, and on that tour, and I interviewed Morgan. And Morgan, I said, who would be the massive threats and major threats? He said India and Australia, with all their franchise experience, because for some reason, whether it be the IPL or whoever, they tend to go for a lot of Australians, and hence those players become very experienced in this sort of format. And since then, Australia have fallen away. Now, maybe because of lack of cricket, or when they have played, they've gone off to Bangladesh and lost on some absolute turning pitches with not their full strength side. And obviously the biggest downfall for them, I would say, it's not an individual, but David Warner's form. I think he got first ball duck yesterday in the warm-up game. His form has really fallen off a cliff. Now, it would be like Jos Buttler suddenly not being able to get a run. And even though England have got others who can back that up, it's still a massive issue in a T20 game where one individual can go a long way to winning the game. So I think if Warner can find some form, then others within that squad, the likes of Finch, who's a brilliant T20 player, white ball player, obviously Steve Smith and people like that, can start knocking it around and playing a different role. But I think Warner's form is absolutely vital to the whole of Australia's T20 World Cup. They've got the bowlers, they've got some spin, they've got Maxwell, that X-factor cricketer.
Absolutely.
They're brilliant in the field.
Well, that Maxwell's an interesting one. Very good IPL and an X-factor player. I mean, you mentioned Warner, I agree with you, but if he has a good tournament, that's a massive tick in their box as well, surely.
Yeah, and he's spoken recently about how his game's improved even more by playing for RCB. He said he felt like 10 foot tall just because he had De Villiers and Virat Kohli in the same dressing room. And I think Maxwell as well, from what we know of Maxwell, he likes the big stage. He is the big show. He is still the big show. But I think he's taken that game on. I think he was someone that maybe 1 in 10. You'd go 8 or 9 games going, what's the fuss about Maxwell? And then you'd go, wow, that's the fuss about Maxwell. I think he is now sort of 1 in 2, 1 in 3. You suddenly, Rob there spoke about Morgan and you spoke about other cricketers that you should be wary of. I think you should be wary of Maxwell. Any side should be wary of him. He can turn it.
The other subplot with Australia, Keezy, is the coach, Justin Langer. I mean, England won the 50 over World Cup with the most relaxed coach in the history of coaching in Trevor Bayliss. You'd say JL would be the other end of the spectrum on that front. And he's come under pressure, isn't he?
Yeah, you feel like he's under a bit of pressure. I mean, I sort of really go off that Test documentary that you watched. I remember thinking, geez, I mean, he'd drive you mad, wouldn't he, Langer, the way that he is. And T20 is generally actually the opposite, where you don't want someone who's on you all the time. You want someone, I mean, I've played in dressing rooms where you want to be able to feel you've got the freedom to go out there and play big shots. And actually you don't want someone saying, bat through the innings. You don't want someone to say, don't lose any wickets in the power play. So that's going to be interesting with him. I look at Australia, I still don't think, I look at their team and I think they've got some good players. You see, I'm not, Warner obviously needs to find form, as Nasser says. And then I'm looking at the sort of team you think, you've got Finch at the top as captain, excellent. Warner out of form. Smith, I don't know if Smith gets T20 cricket. Wade, again, have they not got a better player than Wade to come in at 4 if that's where he's going to come in? And then your Maxwell, Stoinis, but they're 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure they get it completely. Warner does, don't get me wrong, but he's just not in any form, and that's their issue, along with JL.
Haven't you always said that Labuschagne should be in this squad, Athol? What was your thoughts on Labuschagne last, 2 summers ago?
Yeah, I just thought he shouldn't be discounted. People were kind of just writing him off as a test match player. And I thought he was a bit, better than that. And his leg spin offers you something as well. I'm not sure he's the kind of player they need right now. They need more of a boundary hitter that Rob is talking about in that kind of 2, 3, 4 scenario. I just wonder whether if the pitches do spin, whether some of their batsmen might struggle a little bit. They've got some good players. Obviously, their form of late has been pretty desperate. I think it was 2018, was it, or 19? They had an excellent time, or 2018, and then it's just plummeted a bit. But they've not always had their strongest side, and COVID has played a bit of havoc with that. They got heavily beaten West Indies and Bangladesh. Not a side you can discount. I wouldn't say they're favourites to go through in that group, but we shall see if they turn it on. If people like Warner suddenly find a bit of form, you can't discount them with that side.
Well, that's England's game against Australia is on the 30th, and on the 1st of November, they take on the qualifier from Group A, A1. So you're probably thinking either Ireland or Sri Lanka. But again, we'll leave that. Excuse me. And then after you've touched on it already, South Africa, the players you mentioned that are not there. You've got no Faf, no AB de Villiers, no Tahir, no Chris Morris. But who they do have, I mean, I'm thinking of the bowlers, Nortje, Rabada, de Kock, Shamsi, David Miller. There is something there, but there's always something going on with South African cricket that could get in the way of their performances on the field.
Yeah, I think two things about South Africa. They've got an excellent bowling side, haven't they? They look like a stronger bowling outfit. The ones that you mentioned there, Rabada, Nortje, Ngidi and Shamsi are the four main bowlers, and then see how they balance up their side. So I think the key player for them is Quinton de Kock, who for me is one of the outstanding players in the world in T20 cricket. And if he can have an excellent tournament, and then you add the likes of Miller and one or two others just chipping in, if he can really blaze away at the top, and he can, and move his 20s and 30s into 80s or 70s and 80s, then that strong bowling unit that they have could threaten teams. But again, I don't see them as favourites to get out of the group, but they've got, firepower in their bowling lineup there that can trouble teams.
Okay, well, there are two games today in the qualifiers. Papua New Guinea against Scotland. Scotland obviously beat Bangladesh, a great result in their first game by 6 wickets, having been 53 for 6. And then it's Oman against Bangladesh. So it's a big day for Scotland, Af, because that could go a long way to seeing them qualifying over your team, PNG. And it's a big day for Bangladesh as well. Can't afford another defeat.
I think that win for Scotland the other day, I mean, wait and see what happens, but virtually guarantees them to get through, because Bangladesh would be the strongest side in that group that they would play. You'd expect them to beat Papua New Guinea and Oman. And they look a good side. They've got spin options. They've got powerful hitters. They've got quite experienced new ball bowlers there in Brad Wheel and Josh Davey. And they look a good kind of balanced all-round side to me. I don't know whether you saw that when Mamadullah was trying to do his post-match press conference. Did you see that? And they had the Scottish dressing room was obviously just next door, and they were belting out Flower of Scotland. And the door was obviously open, and Mamadullah was just sat there and was being drowned by noise. They're winning national anthem. So they had to wait for that to stop. And I felt a little bit for Mamadullah, but it just showed, it kind of suggested the spirit that Scotland have got going at the moment, and clearly wish them well. If they top their group, I'm just trying to look, but I think if they top their group, they would possibly miss England then, because that would be a great game. We did that game up in Edinburgh, didn't we, a few years ago, when they turned England over, and that would be a terrific game. But I think if they top the group, they'll go and play in the other group too. But if they come second, then they might line up a game again.
Yeah, England play. If Scotland finished second in Group B, they would play England on the 27th of October.
Yeah. But
right,
given that they've beaten Bangladesh, they're a good chance to finish top now, I would have thought.
Okay, right, wrap it up now. Who's going through from the qualifiers? I mean, A, you would say favourites Ireland, Sri Lanka, and we've just touched on B, Bangladesh and Scotland. Would we all be in agreement with that, broadly speaking?
Yeah.
And then fundamentally, excuse me again, who's qualifying from the Super 12s? In one, it'll be, one of the qualifiers. England, Australia, South Africa, West Indies, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, and the other. Who are we going for? I'll start with you, Keezy.
Well, I think we said it earlier. I think England, West Indies go through in England's group, or that should be the two that go through in there.
And what about Group 2? What are we thinking?
I personally,
Well, I mean, India.
Yeah, Pakistan.
Yeah.
Pakistan, I mean, no one's mentioned Pakistan. They've obviously got a bit of a point to prove after recent events. I think they've selected pretty well. Pakistan, who knows in this tournament, to be honest, but I'd say India, Pakistan, West Indies, England, but you never know.
Anything more to add on that, Ath?
No, well, how confident can you be in T20? But if I was having a little tickle on the tournament, those would be the 4 to go through for the semis for me.
Well, lots to look forward to, gentlemen. Thanks very much indeed. Athers, Nash, you enjoy your quarantine. Keezy, I'll see you on the first tee in about an hour or so. We'll have a stroll around outside and maybe a beer afterwards. 2:30.
Keep us
Saturday.
updated. Keep us updated on your skipping,
Skipping,
please.
yeah, we'll have that.
There's a personal best coming later, Nas.